So hello, my name is Jordan Howell, and I am the Associate Professor of Sustainable Business here at Rowan University. And we're very excited today in collaboration with the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to welcome Dr. Simone Phipps and Dr. Prieto. They'll be discussing their research examining the thoughts and ideologies of high-profile African-American business leaders from the late 19th and early 20th century, management philosophies which have long been overlooked and ignored by mainstream management textbooks and research projects. Their study has recently been published as a book called African American Management History, Insights on Gaining a Cooperative Advantage. So some info about our speakers. Dr. Prieto is an Associate Professor of Management at Clayton State University and Associate Research Fellow at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School's Center for Social Innovation. His research areas are in African American management history, social issues in management, and minority social entrepreneurship. And his research is focused on the contributions of minorities, gender, as well as racial and ethnic, to the development of management as a discipline and the interrelationship between organizational management and society. Dr. Simone T.A. Phipps is an Associate Professor of Management at the School of Business at Middle Georgia State University and Associate Research Fellow at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School's Center for Social Innovation. Her research interests include management history, entrepreneurship, HR practices, leadership, and relationships between the organization and society. Usually, her research involves the exploration of gender, racial, and ethnic minorities with the aim of highlighting their struggles and contributions, as well as finding possible solutions to improve the minority experience in business and society. Dr. Prieto and Dr. Phipps have publications in the Journal of Business Ethics, Journal of Management History, and MIT Sloan Management Review, to name a few, and their first book, as we mentioned, is entitled African American Management History, Insights on Gaining a Cooperative Advantage. So really a sensational group of people that we're excited to have here this morning. We also have joining us as our panelists, Dr. Eric Ligori, Professor and Director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Dr. Susanna Santos, Assistant Professor and Co-Director of the Center for Responsible Leadership, who will be joining us for questions and discussion later on in this morning's program. So to the audience, there's a lot of you here, which is fantastic. Please post your questions and comments in the question and answer box, and we will relay them to our speakers. But now, Dr. Phipps and Dr. Prieto, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. And it's our pleasure to deliver this presentation on African American management history. Again, I'm Leon Prieto, joined by Dr. Simone Phipps. And this is a topic near and dear to our hearts, and it is indeed a pleasure to talk to you all a little bit about it. So Sankofa, it's a Akan word which means go back and get it. And this is precisely what Simone and I are trying to do as it relates to our research within this topic of African American management history. So a lot of the textbooks, there tend to be a lot of missing figures, hidden figures in fact. So Black agency is typically absent from the pages of many of the textbooks within entrepreneurship, management, and too many times we see people of African descent depicted as passive actors and almost an afterthought. And it's our responsibility, we think, to uncover some of these originators and social innovators within the African American community. And of late, we have been hearing more about Black Wall Street and how some of these Black social entrepreneurs developed their own communities and businesses in the early 20th century. And many of them practice a more communitarian or a more community-oriented and compassionate version of capitalism during the golden age of Black business. So the golden age of Black business, that was a term coined by Dr. Juliet Walker. She's a Black business historian at the University of Texas. And according to her research, from 1900 to 1930, during that time period, there were a number of successful Black businesses, so hence the term the golden age of Black business. So there's a greater need now to decolonize the business curriculum and include more insights from Black management and entrepreneurship history, so our students get a bigger picture of Americans who have been left out of the entrepreneurship and management canon. So there's a need for a more complete education that informs and inspires present and future entrepreneurs. So capitalism right now in its unadulterated form is being questioned and critiqued during these uncertain times. And we really need to reimagine the purpose of the firm, especially in the post-pandemic society, which we may hopefully encounter soon. So we may need to practice a more compassionate form of capitalism because business as usual is not working anymore. We need to move past that. So there's a lot we can learn from Black business leaders and entrepreneurs during the golden age of Black business. And Simone and I make the argument in our book that those Black entrepreneurs, they gained a cooperative advantage, which was influenced by African tradition during those turbulent times in American history. And Ubuntu is a traditional African philosophy that embodies this spirit of cooperation. We're going to talk about more in this presentation. And that philosophy basically translates to I am because we are. And according to Bangura, there are three main tenets of Ubuntu, which are spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue. And presently, businesses may benefit from adopting these principles. Simone is going to explain those concepts a little more. And I just want to reiterate the point that there are a number of hidden figures within Black entrepreneurship and management history that have been omitted. So we're just trying to fill that gap, and we're trying to answer the call of Cummins and Bridgman, who are some scholars from New Zealand, who called for greater diversity in management education. And they called for a rethinking of how management history is to be relayed. Now I'm going to switch over to Simone, who's going to talk more in depth about cooperative advantage.
Okay, so as Leon mentioned, the African traditions were steeped in cooperation, and the African American businesses, they were able to benefit from what we term a cooperative advantage. So we define cooperative advantage as the benefits that an organization possesses and accrues because of its people-centered and people-oriented approach to engendering those three tenets of spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue for the benefit of employees, customers, and communities. So it's for the benefit of the entire organization's stakeholders. So I'm going to talk about spirituality a bit first. And it's important to mention that spirituality is not necessarily about religion and religious ideals and practices. It's more about well-being and caring about people's well-being and trying to promote stakeholder well-being. So in terms of employees, for example, you can engender spirituality by making sure employees have meaningful work that they can take pride in and that they can feel happy and satisfied that they're making a difference. Also, you want to make sure that they feel like there's that sense of community in the organization, that they can build a rapport, have that connection, and feel like there's trust in the organization. And the idea of building a caring organization is also important, where you care for employees as well as care for the community. So spirituality has more to do with well-being, promoting well-being. Next, I'm going to move on to dialogue, which has to do with making sure there's a conversational sensibility in the organization. So making sure there's discussion. And how do you build dialogue? First, you need to make sure you have a rapport with people in the organization. So you have to build intimacy. And then you need to make sure that there is opportunity for continued interaction so that you can maintain that connection and that dialogue. Also, obviously, inclusion is important because people are not going to feel comfortable to voice their opinions and to give suggestions, etc., unless they feel included. So you may have heard that saying that diversity is inviting someone to the party, but inclusion is actually asking them to dance. So you want everyone to feel included and that their voice matters. And then finally, for dialogue, you need to be intentional. So it's not about encouraging conversation just for conversation's sake, but making sure that stakeholders are aware of the goals of the organization, especially the employees, so that they can make a valuable contribution in terms of making suggestions, etc., to meet the goals and hopes and aspirations of the organization. And the final tenet is consensus building. And it's important to mention that in order to have consensus or agreement within an organization, that's going to build on dialogue. So you can't really reach an agreement unless you include everyone. So it really builds on dialogue. So you have to listen to people when they discuss certain things. And a part of consensus building, you need to allow self-organization. So those employees need to know that they really have a voice, and you need to make sure there's proper representation, going back to that inclusion. Sharing high-quality information. So employees have all the information they need so they can make input, they can give input that really is relevant to what the organization needs. So it's important to mention that you really should seek consensus only after discussions have been fully explored, and that you make sure everyone has a voice. So I'm going to pass it over to Leon again, who's going to talk a little bit about the research process.
All right, so the research question that guided us during this whole process is, how did African traditions of cooperation influence the golden age of black business? And I mentioned one of the traditions of African cooperation, which is Ubuntu. And in many African cultures, be it South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, they all have their own unique system of cooperation, which is somewhat similar to Ubuntu, right, which basically means I am because we are. And many of these traditions, they survived the Middle Passage into the Americas. So Simone and I, we originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and there are a number of African traditions of cooperation which survived slavery within Trinidad. And the same can be said for various parts of the Caribbean, Latin America, be it Cuba, be it Brazil. Many of these traditions survived. And the same thing happened in the United States. So African Americans, they practiced some of those systems of cooperation, and we also saw that permeate within the businesses that they founded. And many of their businesses got their start in the black church. You know, so they practiced these systems of cooperation within the church. They bootstrapped and started these businesses, and it influenced the way they managed some of their companies. So W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the leading and probably the most influential black scholar in African American history, he felt that cooperation was a primary aspect of life in Africa, and that during slavery, there were some traditional customs that were retained from Africa, and that blacks from the U.S. and the Caribbean and Latin America, they practiced. And as I said previously, it survived the Middle Passage. So we researched primary and secondary documents related to black business history, and we discovered management thought leadership that was omitted from the canon. So everyone who studied management are quite familiar with Frederick Taylor and Henry Fayol, etc., but they may not be familiar with names such as Charles Clinton Spaulding and Magdalena Walker and others, and other African Americans who were excluded from the canon. But what we found within their thought leadership was the main theme of cooperation. That theme emerged. And this is just a photo of a newspaper article about Charles Clinton Spaulding, and I'm going to talk about him a little bit. He is now recognized by Thinkers 50 in their Hall of Fame as exemplary management pioneer. So Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame, they previously recognized people like the late Clayton and Michael Porter of Harvard University, Harvard Business School. I know Charles Clinton Spaulding has been recently inducted. So he was known as Mr. Cooperation because he embodied those systems of cooperation from the continent of Africa, and it was embodied in his work. And he's currently known as the father of African American management. So from 1900 until his death in 1952, Spaulding, he managed America's largest black business at the time, which was known as the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. So that company is still in existence today. It's struggling a bit right now, but in the early 20th century, Spaulding, he was as popular as Oprah Winfrey was in the early 20th century. He was very influential. There were schools named after him. People named their children after him. He was very well known, and not just in the United States, but throughout the African diaspora. He even had people writing him from Africa, hoping they could get a job with him or he could sponsor them a scholarship. So he brought fame for himself and his company. And that company is based in Durham, North Carolina. And Durham is known as one of the Black Wall Streets in the United States. So the original one is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood District. But Durham, North Carolina also had a very prominent Black Wall Street. And Charles Clinton Spaulding was a pioneer of Black Wall Street. And the North Carolina Mutual, under Spaulding's administration, they supported the black community by making funds available to fund various social entrepreneurial projects such as hospitals, libraries, churches, newspapers. So they're very much engaged within the community, so they're very community oriented. And as I said previously, he's been excluded from the management canon for the most part, but thankfully some management books are included in his work, namely Management by Chuck Williams. He has been included in his book and maybe 5 or 6 others. So he contributed to his own management and entrepreneurship principles, and he's been overlooked by historical narratives. And briefly, this is some example of his thought leadership. He conceptualized 8 fundamental necessities of management in 1927. And this was before Henry Fayol's Principles of Management and Functions of Management was translated into English from French. So Henry Fayol's work wasn't translated in English not until 1947, I think. So Spaulding, he published his work in popular black newspapers such as the Pittsburgh Courier, right, which was well read by African Americans. So he talked about cooperation and teamwork. That was his whole mantra. He mentioned division of labor and how important that is. He talked about adequate manpower, and he emphasized the need for universities to do a better job integrating theory and practice by using experiential learning. So he wanted his company and others to serve as business laboratories for students to really learn the tricks of the trade of being entrepreneurs and business owners. He talked about conflict resolution, etc. Then in 1937, in another outlet, he outlined his 4 cardinal points of entrepreneurship. So he talked about the importance of having good character, integrity, and things like that. He mentioned the importance of fundamental business principles. He felt entrepreneurs should have knowledge in a particular area before pursuing it as a business venture. And he based that on practical experience because his company, they engaged in unrelated diversification and they bought a textile mill, and it quickly failed because they had very little experience running that textile mill. So they eventually sold it. So he offered that advice based on previous experience. He talked about the importance of having cash or its equivalent. And he also mentioned the need for social service in business. So he understood that the North Carolina Mutual needed to be a social enterprise. So he articulated that long before that term even existed. So Spaulding, he definitely gained a cooperative advantage for the North Carolina Mutual based on his adherence to spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building. And he was a religious person, so his Christianity played a big role in shaping his views and on how he managed and things like that. But as Simone mentioned before, spirituality does not need to include religion, but Spaulding, he definitely was. So many of the African-American business pioneers were religious as well. So he engaged in dialogue with his employees. He encouraged conversations with them to listen to some of their complaints, and he also engaged in dialogue with the community. And he was a big proponent of consensus building as well. He felt that cooperation brings organization, and efficient organization brings success. So he was a big proponent of these different attributes of cooperative advantage. So now Simone is going to talk about another pioneer that we should all learn about.
Okay, so Maggie Walker. And these excerpts you see here on this slide are from a speech that she gave in 1909. It's called the Race Unity Speech. And I want to mention that in this speech, it's very reflective of that theme of cooperation. So she doesn't actually say the term cooperation, but everything she talks about is built on that idea of cooperation being a vital part of progress for the Black community. And so she talks about race as simply being a big family, and you always want family unity, and so you need to have race unity. She also talks about the idea of religion and how, you know, a lot of times people talk about giving up their earthly possessions and until they get to heaven in order to get all the wealth that they couldn't have on earth. But she rejected that notion because she wanted people to be able to enjoy life right here on earth. And so that idea of everybody coming together and participating in that effort to bring that kind of development and progress was very near and dear to her heart. So she wanted the people, the Black community, to unite and to join the ranks of the organization she was a part of, which was the St. Luke Order, which was like a mutual aid society that helped with economic and social development for the Black community. She wanted people to band together, not just for helping the sick, burying the dead, but also to engage in business endeavors for the economic and social development of the community. So she talked about having the money, the brains, the capability, and now everybody needed to arise and come together and show that they can actually get this done and have progress for the entire community. So Magdalena Walker, she's probably best known as being the first Black woman in the U.S. to charter and own a bank. It was the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. And this bank was a social enterprise that helped with the economic and social development of the Black community, because people were able to not just save money, but also to create businesses and also to increase home ownership. So in the next bullet point, it mentioned that because of financing mortgages, home ownership actually rose in the African American community, and by 1920, there were 640 Black homes that were entirely paid for through the bank's help, which was a very big achievement in the Black community to own your own home. Also, another initiative she was a very vital part of starting was a department store called the Emporium, the St. Luke Emporium, which allowed the Black community to have quality goods at a more affordable price, and also to provide jobs for Black women, because at that time, because of segregation and the prejudice, discrimination, etc., Black women were in the jobs that were more marginalized. So with her making sure that we had these other employment opportunities, Black women had a chance to be sales clerks in the store. They also had a chance to work in the bank, gain skills to be something other than just a domestic. And she was involved in a number of other causes as well. For example, she started the Herald, which was a newspaper that gave the Black community a voice so that they could talk about issues like education disparities and lynching, segregation, push for voting rights, etc. So she did a lot, started a number of initiatives and businesses, ventures to help the Black community. And just on this slide here to talk about the themes of cooperative advantage, spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building, which she too embraced. Spirituality, remember, has to do with well-being, and she cared about the Black community, especially the women. She had a very special place in her heart for the women, the Black women, and she talked about the fact that women's fear should no more circumscribe every woman to the hearth, the broom, the washtub, the ironing board, than it should decree every man should be a grocer, banker, etc. So she rejected this idea of roles for men and roles for women. She thought there was neither good sense or justice in that. Just as ability and adaptability decide those kinds of jobs for men, they should decide them for women as well. In terms of dialogue, she was very into including people and establishing rapport, establishing dialogue, discussion. One of her colleagues said they couldn't give her too much praise because whenever they needed her, she would sacrifice her time, her home duties, in order to give advice. And so she never failed them in terms of consensus building that agreement. She did listen to concerns of all relevant voices as in order to make decisions about the different initiatives that she was taking a role in. Okay, so how did these African traditions of cooperation influence entrepreneurship? We already talked about the tenets of cooperative advantage, spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building because of those elements that were very important in Black businesses. The Black community was able to build a number of sustainable enterprises, and Leon already talked about Black Wall Street previously. So sustainable enterprises was a result of that. Also increased employment opportunities for the Black community. Also that idea of philanthropy, because these businesses gave back to the community. They gave a lot to employees, but also to the community. So it was like a relationship built on reciprocity, where they gave to the community and in return the community supported them. And there was an increase in self-worth in the African American community as well, because when there's economic development and social development, then you have that sense of pride that comes from accomplishing and achieving something great. So there are a number of lessons that can be learned from the Black history that we've talked about. It has been found that African Americans are more likely to try starting a business than whites, but are more likely to fail in the early stages of the entrepreneurial process. So it's not that Black people don't try, it's that they're not as successful when they do try to start a business. And one of the reasons for this may be that Black communities often lack a framework to create successful entrepreneurial role models. And we know that role models are really important, seeing these positive images in order to promote intergenerational transference of knowledge, entrepreneurial knowledge and ownership. That's really important. And so it's really important to introduce students to these models even in the classroom. And so for students of color, when they see these examples of successful Black pioneers, they can increase their entrepreneurial knowledge, and not just entrepreneurial knowledge in general, but knowledge that will be specific to their context, where they see the challenges that Black business owners experience that they can relate to, and they can have strategies and ideas that they can also implement, that they can utilize in order to make their businesses work as well. Also entrepreneurial self-efficacy, that confidence that comes with having the knowledge and being able to feel like, you know what, yes, I really can do this because now I'm equipped to go out there and make this business work, and of course motivation. But it's not only for Black students and Black individuals that can learn from Black history. It's for other students as well. Examples of successful Black business pioneers provide a more complete education. You have a more complete perspective of entrepreneurship and the challenges it may bring, and of strategies that you can use to circumvent those challenges. Also, introducing Black history to other students helps with providing a greater understanding of other contexts and the challenges they may bring, and hopefully a greater sense of compassion so that you can take beyond university and into the workplace. So it's important really for everyone and not just Black students. And so some of the implications for contemporary times, we know that there are some issues in the Black community, like unemployment, educational disparities, housing disparities, etc. And these should not only be looked at as problems to address, but also opportunities to resolve these problems, to make a difference. So we need entrepreneurs and business leaders who reflect the pioneers of yesteryear, who are compassionate and more communitarian in their practice of capitalism. And how do you get that kind of entrepreneurs and business leaders? Well, they are usually educated in our business schools, nurtured in our business schools, developed there. So if the business schools then facilitate a more inclusive curriculum that embrace Black management history and reflects those principles of cooperation, then that should encourage cooperation. They'll be more aware of it, and they'll be more likely to practice it upon graduation. We strongly have. So, to conclude, some ideas for future inquiry. It really is important to do additional research to unearth more Black managers, entrepreneurs, and management thought leaders, not just men, but also the women who contributed to management thought and practice. And also we need more research to uncover additional themes associated with the golden age of Black business. So we were able to find cooperation and see what an important role that had to play in the success of Black businesses. But there are going to be other themes out there as well that we really want to look into. And also it would be interesting to have an experimental design that can measure the results of organizations that actually embrace these tenets of spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building to see the impact that these tenets really do have. So, in conclusion, the Black business pioneers supporting and other bigger business economic core and the African Corporation, Ubuntu, as Leon mentioned, permeated their way into more modern forms of business. And we want that to continue. We think it's important that that continues so that businesses can benefit from a cooperative advantage, which, as we mentioned before, is not just about increasing efficiency and maximizing profits. It's about building and maintaining meaningful relationships with people within the organization and the wider community so that all stakeholders can benefit. So in business schools, when we cover in management history, we really think it's important to learn about African traditions and philosophies, as well as the African American business leaders and entrepreneurs, because they can play a role in inspiring organizations to develop that kind of communitarian culture, compassionate, caring culture that embraces cooperation, which can help the business to, in turn, achieve success. So on the next slide, we see a picture of our book, African American Management History, Insights on Gaining a Cooperative Advantage. And so in the book, we do cover Spalding and Magdalena Walker, but we cover other business people as well. For example, Madam C.J. Walker, as you may be familiar with her name, but a lot of people may not be familiar with the name of the person that preceded her, which was Annie Turnbull Malone. So we cover her as well as some other business pioneers. So that ends our presentation. Thank you very much, and we can open for questions now. Feel free to follow us.
Thank you so much. That was really fantastic. Yeah, I think we have some questions that have been posted by our panelists and also some people in the audience. So we can jump right in there. The first one, maybe you can point to specific parts of your book. Rick Johnson, who's a faculty member here at Rowan, asks, are there particular writings or speeches by Magdalena Walker and C.C. Spalding that are representative of their thought and leadership? Something in particular you could point to?
All right. Well, in terms of Charles Clinton Spalding, he wrote a lot, and so a number of his speeches, they're available in our book, but for someone to access them now, we'd have to go through some archives just to get them. But as I previously mentioned, you know, his article, The Administration of Big Business, that outlined his philosophy of management. And then that article he wrote about the 4 cardinal points of entrepreneurship, it pretty much summarized his philosophy of entrepreneurship. In terms of Magdalena Walker, she delivered many speeches. And Simone might want to add some more about her speeches.
Yes, it was very articulate. She was a family woman, but she traveled a lot in order to give her speeches. And as Leon said, you're going to have to get into archives to access those speeches, but we do have some excerpts from the speeches in the book.
All right, yeah. It's a great book, and no one should be scared of it. It's very thin volume. It's readable. It's not like it's 12,000 pages, so it's very accessible and well written. Eric wrote a question, but Eric can ask his own question by unmuting himself, I think.
And I honestly don't know if I even posted it in the right spot, so apologies. I think it's really important work that you guys are doing, and you know that I've been a big fan for I feel like a decade at this point. I guess my question or my takeaway is like, what's the action item here? How do we all walk away? We've got 90 people on this call and do one small thing that can help spread the word here. Like, what's it going to take to get these stories put into history books, put into mainstream media, put into children's books, to help inspire that next generation to fuel this sort of overflow effect that you want when you talk about self-efficacy, for example?
Well, there's a bit of decolonizing the curriculum, and so education is a big part of spreading the word. And so decolonization of the curriculum is not just for when you get to university. It really should start from even high school, middle school, elementary school, where you introduce kids to a variety of people who have contributed and not just the select few that you hear about all the time, so that students can see a representation of a number of different people that look like them. So for the black students, you want to see people that look like them and other students as well. So education is a very big part. In terms of mainstream media, support really goes a long way when you have other, like colleagues, a lot of times post and share ideas from us and from other colleagues about the work of different people that you may not have heard about. And because of that, it ends up getting into, more mainstream media, and Leon can talk a little bit about that as well. colleagues sharing.
Thankfully, we have some wonderful colleagues within academia, people like Eric. Then I got some colleagues at Cambridge who Simon and I work with at George Business School, colleagues at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. They also integrate African American management history into their classrooms, So we're seeing more professors pushing some of these textbook publishers to include more diversity and being more inclusive in terms of some of the things they cover within the textbooks. So we've seen a greater push for that. And now, especially with COVID-19 and people gaining a greater consciousness about sustainability and things like that, we need to really re-envision capitalism, and people want to see more work as it relates to that, because capitalism in its current form is not good for the environment. It's not sustainable. We need to make it much more compassionate, much more conscious. And I think opening up the canon and the literature to African American management history, learning values from indigenous cultures, be it Native American and even other cultures throughout the world, can actually help us develop the world in which we really want to live in, So people want to see more diverse thoughts, more diverse ideas that could really help our society become a more sustainable one.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Jordan, sorry. You want to go?
I had a question, if I could jump in, and I appreciate that you mentioned sustainability, because that's one of my interests for sure. And we always talk about sustainability as having three dimensions of being environmental, but also economic and also social. And I think it's easy to conceptualize sustainable business as far as the impacts on environment and making sure that you have a healthy company from a financial perspective. But I think it's a lot harder for a lot of folks to understand what does a socially sustainable business look like. And so I was wondering if the two of you could comment on how you see diversity of thought, ethnic, racial, gender, all the forms of diversity. How is that a sustainability issue, and how can we better understand the kind of social dimensions of sustainability within a business? Big question for sure. So
It does include a number of parts, but when you ask that question, I remember I think they call it the triple bottom line, profit, people, and planet, or something like that. And that idea of social sustainability is going to be important, because if you don't have the people aspect and you don't care about the people and the well-being of the people who really are the customers, really, then the businesses really aren't going to be sustainable. So they really do interact with each other and they complement each other. And so diversity is really important, because the more that you include everyone, that's why we talk about inclusion so much. The more you include everyone, make everyone feel welcome and that you actually care about their well-being, is the more you're going to get support from those people in order to contribute to the economic side of sustainability. People are more likely to want to support you if they feel that you actually care about them. So we do think that there is a link with all those elements of sustainability, and you really can't fully have one without the other. They really help each other.
Yeah, okay. I like that. That's a cool answer. Can I ask another brief question? Maybe not quite as large of a question, but are there instances of contemporary firms that are applying the principles that you've uncovered and are bringing to all of us? Like, are there contemporary managers out there that are specifically adopting, some of the perspectives of Magdalena Walker or C.C. Spalding or the others that you write about?
Unfortunately, currently we're not too much aware of companies that really adopt these principles. So that's why we wrote the book, so we could encourage people to, take a look back at history, to pretty much find a way to chart a way forward, because the way businesses are being ran today, not all, there are some that practice a more conscious form of capitalism, but many have been missing the mark. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were instances of businesses, small and large, engaging in price gouging and things like that just to profit from this pandemic. So it's very important for entrepreneurs, business owners to really reflect on some of these past traditions of cooperation and try to integrate it in the way they manage their firm. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for managers and entrepreneurs to learn from some of these pioneers. But unfortunately, people have somewhat forgotten some of these past traditions.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really interesting response. We can hope that it will become something that's a common approach to management. Susanna, I've been talking too much. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a very exciting talk. So thank you for sharing and for being here with us. We have a question in the chat from Matt. Matt is one of my Matt is HR and Matt is asking, how challenging and how long did it take to write your book?
Well, we were a bit fortunate, I have to say. When it came to writing our book, we saw a gap within the literature, and we decided, we're going to try to delve in the archives to try to find some primary sources and things like that. And we were very fortunate to encounter a treasure trove of archives from Duke University and also the Magdalena Walker Museum were also gracious when it came to giving us access to their speeches and things like that. So it was a fairly straightforward process, and we enjoyed it. So it didn't really seem like work because we're really passionate about African American management history, and so it was not a painful process at all. But that's from my perspective. Maybe Simone has a totally different opinion.
No, I agree with that. We were really motivated because I think there was a personal aspect to it as well, because as undergraduate students, we both attended HBCUs, and so studying management, we realized that going through the textbooks, as he mentioned, learning about Frederick Taylor, Fayol, Chester Barnard, all these people, and in terms of the women, you might hear about Follett now, but we never once heard or learned about a black person in a textbook that contributed to management. So you start to question, okay, I'm sure it's not that black people did not contribute, so why are they absent from the textbook? So that really helped give us a motivation to say, okay, we need to make a difference here. And so that helped a lot with writing the book as well, that motivation to include these people who did contribute so that they could be added to the canon.
Thank you. That's a very cool aspect, and I actually believe that following the examples, right, is so key, and it's very, very important. Thank you so much. We have another question in the chat. It's from Michelle, and Michelle is asking, can you discuss any specific policies that inhibit entrepreneurship and economic development within the African American unity.
Okay. In terms of economic development, what I would really like to see a greater push for is the formation of more cooperatives, right? So there's this professor, what university? Oh my goodness. She's at the University of New York. Her name is Dr. Gordon Nemhard, and she wrote this book on the history of black cooperatives in the United States. So the name of her book is Collective Courage. So we would like to see a greater push for more black cooperatives because the failure rate is much lower in cooperatives than traditional businesses. And because access to capital is such a tremendous issue for a lot of African American business owners, and not just African Americans, other unrepresented minority groups as well. They seem to have a greater problem accessing capital. So cooperatives presents a great opportunity to really aid in economic development and entrepreneurship. So and there's a rich history of cooperation, black economic cooperation within the United States and other parts of the world. So people like W.E.B. Du Bois, he's well known for a lot of his writings on race and other issues. But what a lot of people don't realize, he also wrote a lot about the importance of black people engaging in starting cooperatives. He was a big advocate of African Americans starting cooperatives. And people didn't really listen to him and give him the kind of respect in that regards that they should have. And I think if African Americans put a greater emphasis on starting cooperatives to solve some of these wicked problems facing the black community, we may see some positive social change.
That's great. That's really interesting, and I know that you have a time restriction that we're running up against right now, and so we want to be respectful of that. So we can all thank you one more time for joining us this morning and sharing this really interesting and important research with us. So much to think about, and hopefully we can all find ways of integrating what we've learned into what we teach and businesses we might operate or help to start, and really sort of spread the good ideas that you've uncovered and brought to all of us to the wider kind of business community and business education. So we'll imagine that all 90 people are clapping for you, since it's just the 5 of us here on the screen that you can actually hear. But thank you once again, and everyone out there, thanks for joining us this morning. If you'd like to listen to a recording or view a recording of the talk, it'll be posted to the Center for Responsible Leadership's YouTube channel in the coming days, and you can check it out there. So thanks once again, Dr. Simone Phipps and Leon Prieto, for joining us.